They were abandoned by their own children, until the day the judge informed them about the inheritance. Walter Thompson pressed the worn leather suitcase against his chest as the rain beat against his wrinkled face. Beside him, his wife Margaret shivered from the cold, and something much worse than the storm raging over the dirt road connecting the town of Greenfield to the neighboring district. It had only been 3 hours since Robert, their eldest son, had stopped the car right there in that same spot and spoken the words that still echoed in Walter's ears like a hammer. "Dad, Mum, you'll have to fend for yourselves now. We sold the house and need the money. Here's $500. It should be enough to get started." Margaret had begged, holding onto her son's arm, asking where they would sleep that night. The answer came dryly, without a drop of emotion. "You're adults. Figure it out." The roar of the engine fading into the distance left the couple alone with a reality that seemed impossible to accept. "Walter, what are we going to do?" Margaret whispered, her tears mixing with the rainwater streaming down her face. The 68-year-old man looked at the woman who had shared his life for 42 years. Margaret had her wet grey hair stuck to her face, her wool sweater soaked, and in those brown eyes that once shone with joy when she said yes at the altar, now there was only fear and confusion. "We'll be fine, my love. You'll see," Walter lied, feeling his heart race in a way that had nothing to do with his known heart condition. The suitcase they carried contained their most basic clothes, some medicine, and the documents Robert had thrown on the table before leaving. "Take this too, just in case you need it." As if they were trash being discarded. The first shelter they found was the awning of an old abandoned bus station. Margaret pulled half a dinner roll from her pocket that she had saved from breakfast, not knowing it would be her last meal in that house where they raised 3 children and built an entire life. "Remember when Robert was little and would fight with Jennifer over the last piece of sweet bread?" Margaret tried to smile. "And you always said siblings have to share." Walter chewed slowly, not to savor it, but because he knew he needed to make that food last. "Where did we go wrong, Margaret?" "We didn't go wrong. We gave them everything." The night brought a cold that penetrated their bones. Walter took off his coat and covered Margaret, who protested weakly. He was left with only the long-sleeved shirt he had been wearing for 3 days, ever since Robert showed up at home, with the news that they had sold the property. Margaret couldn't sleep properly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jennifer's face when she said, "Mom, you've lived your life. Now let us live ours," and the silence of Michael, the middle child, who just lowered his head and murmured that he agreed with his siblings. When the sun rose, Walter was already awake, watching the traffic on the road. Some truckers stopped for coffee at a nearby diner. One of them, a man in his 50s, approached. "Are you folks doing all right there?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "We're just waiting for the bus," Walter replied, pride speaking louder than need. The trucker didn't seem convinced, but he respected their space and walked away. Margaret looked at her husband with silent disapproval. They didn't even have money for a bus ticket. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The second day brought a devastating discovery. Walter tried to withdraw money at the bank using the card that had always worked, but the screen showed insufficient funds. He tried again, thinking he had entered the wrong PIN. The message repeated itself. "This can't be right," he murmured, while Margaret waited outside the bank branch. The manager, Mark, had known the couple for years. When Walter explained the situation, the man checked the system and made a face that confirmed their worst fears. "Mr. Thompson, there was a large movement in the account last week, consecutive withdrawals that zeroed out the balance." Mark lowered his voice. "Did you authorize these transactions?" "No, of course not." Walter felt the world spinning. "Who did this?" "Well, you gave power of attorney to your children a few years ago, remember, to make it easier when they needed to help with banking matters." Reality hit Walter like a punch in the stomach. The $500 Robert had given them were crumbs from their own money. 40 years of savings, retirement, everything had vanished. Margaret didn't cry when he told her. She just sat on the bench in the park across from the bank and stared at her own hands, as if trying to understand how they had gotten there. "Margaret, say something," Walter pleaded. "What do you want me to say?" she answered in a voice he had never heard before. "That I thought I knew the children I raised? That I thought a mother's love meant something to them?" That afternoon, they sought help from the city's social services. The employee, a young woman named Ashley, assisted them kindly, but the options were limited. A spot at the municipal shelter or a waiting list for social housing that would take months. "Is the shelter temporary?" asked Margaret. "In theory, yes. But to be honest, we have people who've been there for over 2 years." The St. Joseph Municipal Shelter was on the outskirts of Greenfield, a 2-story building with peeling paint and an inner courtyard where groups of seniors chatted on concrete benches. The director, Mrs. Carroll, a maternal woman in her 60s, welcomed them. "You're not the first couple to arrive here in this situation," she said, escorting them to a shared dormitory. "Unfortunately, elder abandonment has become an epidemic." The room they shared with 6 other residents had metal bunk beds, some with mattresses that had seen better days. Margaret climbed into the top bunk. Walter stayed on the bottom. For the first time in 40 years, they would sleep in separate beds. "Good night, my love," whispered Margaret in the dark. "Good night," he replied, swallowing the words he wanted to say, that he felt ashamed, that he didn't know how to protect her, that he was afraid of what the future held. The days at the shelter revealed heartbreaking stories. Mrs. Ethel had been hospitalized by her children and then forgotten there when they were medically discharged. Mr. Joseph lost his house because his daughter didn't pay the mortgage he had transferred to her name. Each story was a variation on the same theme: children who had become strangers. Margaret began helping in the kitchen, refusing to stay still. She had a knack for seasoning the basic foods the shelter received from donations, turning simple meals into something that felt like maternal care. Walter fixed whatever came up: a wobbly chair, a leaky faucet, anything to feel useful. "You have a gift, Mrs. Thompson," said Cecilia, the official cook. "I've never seen anyone work miracles with so little." 2 weeks after their arrival, Margaret fainted in the kitchen. The scare was universal. Walter carried his wife in his arms to the infirmary, ignoring the chest pains he had felt since they arrived at the shelter. "It's weakness, that's all," diagnosed the volunteer nurse. "She needs to eat better." But Walter knew it wasn't just physical weakness. Margaret was wasting away from sadness, losing the sparkle in her eyes each day. That night, when everyone was asleep, he heard her crying softly, "Margaret, I just can't understand, Walter. Did we do something really wrong to deserve this?" He climbed onto her bunk bed for the first time, ignoring the metal creaking, and hugged her. "We didn't do anything wrong, we loved too much." The following month, Robert showed up at the shelter. Walter was in the courtyard playing dominoes with Mr. Joseph when he heard his son's voice asking for them at the reception. The old man's heart raced, a mix of relief and anger. Robert wore a new suit, shiny shoes, an expensive watch on his wrist. He looked uncomfortable, as if the shelter environment might stain his clothes. "Dad, Mom," he greeted without showing emotion. "What do you want here?" Margaret asked before Walter could speak. "Look, I came because an issue came up. Do you remember Uncle Albert, Grandpa Walter's brother, the one who went to live in Costa Rica in the 80s? Walter nodded. Albert was his father's younger brother, who had left the United States young in search of opportunities and with whom they had lost contact decades ago. Well, he passed away, and he left some properties. There are some papers you need to sign to renounce the inheritance, otherwise it'll cause problems with the documentation. "Renounce why?" Walter questioned. "Dad, you don't even know where these properties are. They're plots of land in the middle of nowhere. They'll bring more headaches than profit. It's better to let it go." Margaret studied her son's face. 40 years of motherhood had taught her to read every expression, every tone of Robert's voice. And something was wrong with that conversation. "We'll think about it," she said. "There's nothing to think about, Mom. Just sign. I brought the documents." "I said we'll think about it," Margaret repeated, this time firmly. Robert put the papers away with poorly disguised irritation. "Look, you have 3 days to decide. After that, the lawyers will take other measures." After he left, Walter and Margaret remained silent for long minutes. "He's lying," said Margaret. "How do you know?" "Mothers know, Walter. And that boy was always terrible at lying." Remember when he broke the living room vase and tried to blame the cat? Mrs. Carroll had overheard part of the conversation and approached them. If I may suggest, you should see Mr. Arthur. He's a retired lawyer, lives here in the neighborhood and sometimes helps people in the community. Mr. Arthur Fleming was 72 years old, retired 10 years ago after a respectable law career. He lived in a simple but tidy house, with a library that took up an entire wall in the living room. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said, serving coffee in porcelain cups that Margaret recognized as being of good quality. When they finished the account, Mr. Arthur shook his head. "This inheritance renunciation story smells like a scam. If it were really worthless, why the rush? I'll investigate." The 3 days passed with Robert calling the shelter insistently, growing more and more impatient. Margaret instructed Mrs. Carroll to say they were still deciding. A week later, Mr. Arthur returned with information that would change everything. "Sit down," he said, serious. "What I'm about to tell you will be hard to believe." "Worse than our current situation?" Margaret said ironically. "Your Uncle Albert wasn't just any immigrant in Costa Rica. He built a real empire in agribusiness, farms, meatpacking plants, meat exports. He died childless and left everything to his nephews in the United States." Walter felt dizzy. How much money?" "We're talking millions. Several properties, bank accounts in 3 countries. And there's more. Robert has already contacted the office handling the estate, using forged documents where you supposedly named him as legal representative." Margaret stood up so fast, she almost tripped. That boy is trying to steal our inheritance. Not just trying, he has already set part of the process in motion. If you had signed those renunciation papers, you would have handed everything over to him on a silver platter." The revelation left the couple stunned. It wasn't just abandonment, it was a calculated strategy to take possession of a fortune they didn't even know existed. "What do we do now?" asked Walter. "First, we'll prove that you are the true heirs and that you're victims of document forgery. Second, we'll make sure Robert and the other children answer for this." In the following days, attorney Arthur Fleming worked tirelessly gathering documents, birth certificates, marriage records, anything that could prove the family lineage. Margaret and Walter provided everything they remembered about Uncle Albert: stories from his youth, old letters they had kept, photographs in yellowed albums. "He always sent Christmas cards," recalled Margaret, sifting through a shoebox of old correspondence. "He stopped sending them around the 90s. I thought he had forgotten about us." "Actually, he never stopped," revealed attorney Fleming. "The letters were intercepted. I have here copies of correspondence his office sent to your address over the last 20 years. All were returned or marked as undeliverable." "But how?" asked Walter. Someone in the family had provided an alternate address for important mail. Guess who? The answer hit like a punch. Robert had offered years ago to help with the paperwork for his parents, including redirecting important mail to his own address. Margaret felt a mix of anger and disappointment consuming her from within. "He planned this for years, Walter. For years." The first hearing at the Greenfield courthouse took place on a rainy Tuesday. Robert showed up accompanied by a young, well-dressed lawyer who wouldn't look anyone in the eye. Jennifer came too, but stayed on the opposite side of the room, avoiding eye contact with her parents. The judge, Howard Nelson, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor, examined the documents presented by both parties. "Mr. Robert, you claim to have general power of attorney to represent your parents in inheritance matters. But here I have the original document where your parents named you only as their representative for simple banking matters, not for estate proceedings. Your Honor, my parents are elderly. They aren't capable of managing a complex inheritance abroad." "I am capable," interrupted Margaret, standing up, "and I'm capable of knowing when my own son is trying to steal from me." Robert's lawyer tried to question Margaret's mental capacity, but attorney Fleming presented recent medical reports confirming the couple's full lucidity. During the recess, Jennifer approached her parents for the first time. "Dad, Mum, you don't understand. Robert said he was protecting you, that the money would be used to pay for a decent nursing home." "And you believed that?" asked Margaret. "Even after leaving us out in the rain on the roadside?" Jennifer looked away. We thought you would manage, that you would seek help from social services. Sweetheart, you threw us away like we were trash. And now you find out the trash is worth millions, huh? The hearing revealed more sordid details. Robert had not only intercepted mail, but had also impersonated his parents in international phone calls, mimicking his father's voice to confirm details with the law firm in Costa Rica. He studied every detail, explained Attorney Fleming during a break. He knew exactly what he was doing for at least 5 years. Michael appeared in court on the second day of hearings. Unlike his siblings, he seemed genuinely devastated. "Dad, Mom, I didn't know anything about this inheritance," he said, with tears in his eyes. I just thought we really needed the money from the house. My debts, the problems with the store." "Michael, you left us out in the rain," said Walter. "Literally out in the rain with nowhere to go." "I know, Dad. I know there's no excuse, but Robert said you had distant family who would help, that it was just a matter of time." Margaret looked at her middle son, the one who had always been the most sensitive, and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Unlike Robert, who just seemed annoyed at having been caught. "Michael, if you're truly sorry, you'll have to prove it with actions, not just words," she said. The turning point in the investigation came when Dr. Arthur discovered that Robert had tried to bribe a courthouse employee to alter dates on old documents. The employee, an honest man named Victor, had recorded the conversation on his cell phone. "Look here, it's just $5,000 for you to fix the dates on these documents. No one will ever know," Dr. Arthur replayed at the next hearing. The audio was devastating. Robert tried to claim he was just trying to correct administrative errors, but his own voice condemned him. During the weeks of the trial, Margaret and Walter stayed at the shelter, but now with a completely different perspective. They heard similar stories, formed genuine friendships, and Margaret continued to transform the kitchen there. "Mrs. Margaret, you should open a restaurant," joked Mr. Malcolm, one of the longest-term residents. "I've never had sausage stuffing like yours." "Well, Mr. Malcolm, maybe one day I will," she replied, not realizing how prophetic that joke would be. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The court's verdict came after 2 months of legal battle. The judge was categorical. Robert would be charged with document forgery and attempted embezzlement. Jennifer, for having participated while knowing the facts, would also face charges. Michael, for showing genuine remorse and cooperating with the investigation, received only a warning. The inheritance remains entirely with the true heirs, Mr. Walter and Mrs. Margaret Thompson, announced Dr. Howard. Robert left the courtroom with a face red with anger, but without the courage to look at his parents. Jennifer tried to approach to ask for forgiveness once more, but Margaret just shook her head. "Jennifer, forgiveness is earned, not asked for." The transition from absolute poverty to sudden wealth was more difficult than Margaret and Walter had imagined. First came the lawyers from the international firm, explaining investments, properties, bank accounts in different currencies. The numbers were so large they didn't make sense. "How many zeros are there?" asked Margaret, looking at a bank statement. 8 zeros, ma'am," replied the lawyer, "not counting the cents." They moved to a modest hotel in downtown Greenfield while they decided what to do. Margaret insisted. Nothing too luxurious, nothing that would make them forget where they came from. But the first decision was unanimous. They would not abandon their friends from the shelter. "Dr. Arthur, we want to buy some land and build a big house." "A really big house, guy," said Walter. "For you to live in. For everyone to live in." The property they chose was on the outskirts of town, a 5-acre plot with a beautiful view of the mountains. The house design took months to complete. Individual rooms for each senior, an industrial kitchen where Margaret could work freely, a library, a game room, a garden with benches scattered about. During construction, Robert made a desperate attempt to reconnect. He showed up at the hotel with flowers and tears in his eyes. "Dad, Mom, I made a terrible mistake, but I am your son. I always will be." "You're a son when you act like one," replied Margaret. "You acted like a stranger." "But look what you're doing, spending the whole inheritance on strangers. These people will bleed you dry." "Robert, these strangers took us in when you threw us out on the street," said Walter. "They are our family now." The young man stormed out, slamming the door, yelling that his parents had gone crazy with the money. But Margaret and Walter knew exactly what they were doing. The Thompson Care Home was inaugurated on a sunny April morning. 25 seniors attended the ceremony, including everyone from the old shelter who wanted to move. Mrs. Carroll was hired as the administrator, Cecilia as the head chef. "I never imagined I'd live in a house like this," said Mrs. Ethel, stroking the curtains by her window. 40 square meters just for me. Margaret organized the rooms personally, making sure every resident felt at home. Walter set up woodworking workshops in the backyard, where the men could work on projects they donated to needy families in the area. "You know what I think is most beautiful?" commented Mr. Joseph one afternoon. "You could have bought a mansion and lived like kings, but you chose to live like decent people." Michael was the first child to visit the new home. He arrived timidly, apologizing again, but this time with concrete actions. He brought the grandchildren, Peter and Sophie, who hadn't seen their grandparents in months. "Grandpa Walter," shouted 8-year-old Peter, running into his grandfather's arms. "Why did you disappear? We asked Daddy, but he never really explained." Margaret hugged her grandchildren tightly, feeling a joy she hadn't experienced in months. "Do you want to see our new home?" The grandchildren were enchanted with the property. 6-year-old Sophie immediately befriended Mrs. Ethel, who taught her how to crochet. Peter helped Walter in the woodshop, hammering nails with more enthusiasm than skill. "Michael," called Margaret when the grandchildren were playing in the garden, "you can visit whenever you want, but there's one condition." "What is it, Mum?" "You will work here 2 afternoons a week, for free. You'll help the seniors with physical therapy, you'll talk with them, you'll show that you've really changed." Michael accepted without hesitation, and he kept his word. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he showed up at the care home, helping with simple exercises, listening to stories, being useful. "He's different," Margaret commented to Walter after a few weeks. "More humble. Maybe our pain taught him something." The contrast with Robert was stark. The eldest son sued his parents, claiming they were not mentally fit to manage the inheritance. The lawsuit lasted months, with medical evaluations proving the couple's full capacity. "That boy never gives up," sighed Margaret during one of the hearings. "He takes after my father," replied Walter. "Dad was stubborn too, but at least he was honest." Jennifer took almost a year to show her face. When she appeared, it was on an afternoon when Margaret was teaching cooking to some of the younger residents. "Mom," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Margaret didn't stop stirring the sauté. "Jennifer, can I talk to you?" "You can, but I won't stop cooking. 15 people are waiting for lunch." Jennifer approached slowly, as if afraid of being bitten. "Mom, I know I did a terrible thing. I know there's no excuse." "There really isn't. But I wanted you to know that I always thought I was protecting Robert. He said you were going to be tricked, that people would take advantage." Margaret finally stopped stirring the sauté and looked at her daughter. "Jennifer, you are 42 years old. Do you really believe your father and I are fools?" "No, Mom. I know you're smart. She began to cry. "I just wanted you all to forgive me." "Forgiveness isn't something you give, my dear. It's something you build. If you want my forgiveness, you'll have to show you deserve it, just like Michael is doing." The work at the Thompson Care Home gave new meaning to Margaret and Walter Thompson's lives. In the mornings, Margaret organized activities in the kitchen and garden. Walter led a maintenance team made up of capable residents themselves. "Did you know that Mr. Joseph was an engineer?" Margaret told Michael during one of his visits. 30 years designing bridges. And Mrs. Ethel was a Portuguese teacher for 40 years. Imagine how many stories these people have to tell. The home became a reference in the region. Other cities sent representatives to learn about the project. Margaret was invited to give talks about dignified aging, something she never imagined doing in her life. "How would you define dignified aging?" asked a young social worker during a talk. "It's simple," Margaret replied. "It's when you reach your 70s and still feel like a person. Not a burden, not dead weight, a person." Walter developed a parallel project, a cooperative woodworking shop where skilled seniors taught underprivileged young people from the area. The products were sold in a small shop attached to the home, and the income supplemented the activities. "Mr. Walter, you saved my life," said Jason, a 17-year-old boy who learned woodworking from him. "I was heading down the wrong path, but here I found something I love to do. Jason, you're the one who saved me. When we teach, we learn twice as much." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 2 years after the first hearing, an unexpected event shook the Thompson family. Michael arrived at the care home one afternoon, agitated, with disturbing news. "Dad, Mom, something happened. Robert, he's in serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" asked Walter. "The investments he made with the money he took from you went wrong. He lost everything, and worse, he owes a lot of money to a lot of people." Margaret stopped watering the garden plants. "And what does he want? For us to help?" "He didn't ask for anything. He's still too proud for that. But, Dad, he could lose the house. The whole family could end up on the street." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The son who had left his parents out in the rain now faced the possibility of experiencing the same fate. "What do you all think we should do?" Margaret asked the group of residents during dinner. "Mrs. Margaret, with all due respect, but that boy made you and Mr. Walter suffer too much," opined Mrs. Ethel. "It's true," agreed Mr. Malcolm. "Sometimes we have to let people reap what they sow." But Margaret grew thoughtful. That night, she talked at length with Walter while walking through the home's gardens. "Walter, if we let Robert sink, aren't we just like him?" "Margaret, he threw us out, literally." "I know, but we can't let the grandchildren pay for their father's mistakes." Walter knew that tone of voice. Margaret had made a decision, and when she decided something, she rarely changed her mind. The proposal they made to Robert was presented through Michael. The parents would pay all his debts, but with strict conditions. Robert would work at the care home for 2 years, without salary, learning the value of serving others. Furthermore, he and his family would move to a simple house on the property where they would live under supervision. "This is humiliating," was Robert's first reaction. "Son, what's humiliating is leaving your own parents out in the rain," replied Margaret. "You either accept it or solve your problems on your own." The pressure from his creditors forced Robert to accept. The move to the care home was tense. His wife Fiona arrived complaining about everything. The small room, the lack of privacy, the simple food. "Fiona, if you can't adjust, you can leave," Margaret said firmly. "But my grandchildren stay here." Peter and Sophie loved the move. They had 15 grandpas and grandmas willing to tell stories, teach old games, make kites and plant flowers. The entire house mobilized to teach the children about values that were being forgotten. "Grandma Margaret, why was Daddy always angry before?" Sophie asked one afternoon while helping make bread. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people become blinded by so much greed. They forget what really matters." Robert resisted for months. He did the mandatory work unwillingly, complained about the conditions, treated the elderly with poorly disguised contempt. But the forced coexistence began to bring about subtle changes. "Mr. Robert, could you help me with this electric bill?" Mrs. Ethel asked one morning. "My eyes can't see the small numbers anymore." Robert grumbled but helped. And he discovered that Mrs. Ethel received only a minimum wage pension, donated half to an unemployed granddaughter, and still managed to save $10 a month to buy school supplies for underprivileged children. "How do you manage?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Son, when you learn that happiness has nothing to do with money, any money becomes a lot of money." Small moments like this added up. Robert saw Mr. Joseph crying because he didn't have money to go to a childhood friend's wake. Without anyone knowing, he paid for the bus ticket and even gave money for a wreath of flowers. "Why did you do that?" asked Michael, who had caught his brother. "I don't know," Robert replied. "I just thought it was the right thing to do." Margaret watched her eldest son's changes cautiously. She didn't want to get her hopes up, but she noticed signs that something was transforming within him. The first serious crisis at the care home happened when Mr. Malcolm suffered a stroke. Robert was on duty in the infirmary when it happened and was the one who provided first aid, keeping the elderly man conscious until the ambulance arrived. "Thank you very much," Margaret said when they returned from the hospital with the news that Mr. Malcolm was stable. Why, Mom? For taking care of him as if he were family. He kind of is family now, isn't he? Margaret didn't answer, but for the first time in 2 years she smiled at Robert. Mr. Malcolm's recovery took months. Robert volunteered to help with physical therapy, taking the elderly man for daily walks, talking about football and politics. It was during these conversations that Mr. Malcolm revealed something surprising. Mr. Robert, I worked for 40 years in a metal factory. You know what I learned? What, Mr. Malcolm? That metal only gets strong after it goes through the fire. People too. Jennifer took longer to accept reality. She continued suing her parents, claiming the donation of the house to the CARE project had been made under emotional coercion. The lawsuit dragged on for another year. She doesn't give up, does she? Commented Dr. Arthur. She takes after my mother, Margaret sighed. Mom was stubborn too. During this period, Jennifer isolated herself from the family, only appearing at court hearings with a stern face and aggressive lawyers. But the strategy backfired when the judge ordered an investigation into the financial situation of the Thompson children. The investigation revealed that Jennifer had used part of the money taken from her parents to buy a luxury apartment in Chicago, registered under straw men to hide the source of the funds. Ms. Jennifer, can you explain how a clothing saleswoman managed to buy a $500,000 apartment? The prosecutor asked. The hearing was devastating for Jennifer. Besides losing the case, she was forced to return the apartment and pay a heavy fine. She left the courtroom in tears, but still without seeking out her parents. She'll be back, prophesied Margaret. When a person has nothing left to lose, sometimes they find what truly matters. The prophecy came true 6 months later. Jennifer showed up at the Thompson care home on a Sunday morning, unannounced. Margaret was on the porch reading to Mrs. Ethel, who had lost almost all her sight. Mom, said Jennifer, her voice filled with a humility Margaret hadn't heard in years. Jennifer. Margaret didn't stop reading, but gestured for her daughter to come closer. I lost everything, Mom. The apartment, the car, even my job. Mark left me and took the boys. Margaret closed the book slowly. And now what do you want? I don't know. I just wanted to apologize for real, without wanting anything in return. Jennifer, sit here, said Margaret, pointing to a chair next to hers. Do you want to tell me what really happened after you kicked us out? For the first time, Jennifer told the complete truth, how Robert had convinced his siblings that their parents were becoming senile, how he had shown fake documents proving they were being swindled by opportunists, how he had painted a picture of their parents as incompetent people who needed to be protected from themselves. He said you would understand later, that when you saw the money being managed well, you would be grateful. And you believed that? I wanted to believe, Mom. My store was failing. Mark lost his job. When Robert said the inheritance would solve everyone's problems. Margaret listened to everything in silence. When Jennifer finished, they remained quiet for long minutes, just listening to the sound of the other residents talking in the garden. Jennifer, you can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about the rest. That night, Margaret talked to Walter about the proposal she had in mind for Jennifer. Are you sure? He asked. Walter, she was deceived by her own brother. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. And every mother deserves a second chance to raise her children right. The proposal for Jennifer was similar to Robert's. Work at the home for 2 years, but her role would be different. She would coordinate educational activities for children in the community, using her experience as a saleswoman to teach basic entrepreneurship to young mothers in need. I don't know if I'll be good at this, said Jennifer. Daughter, you will learn. That's what a second chance is for. The following months were a difficult adjustment. Jennifer lived in a simple little room, shared a bathroom with 2 other caregivers, and ate in the common kitchen. For someone who had grown accustomed to luxuries, it was a shock. But the work with the community's children gradually transformed her. Seeing young mothers struggling to raise children alone, witnessing the determination of women working double shifts to educate their children, made her rethink many things. Mrs. Jennifer, my daughter really wants to learn to read, but I don't know how to teach her properly, said Jessica, a 28-year-old recyclable materials collector. Bring her here tomorrow, Jessica. We'll figure something out. The educational project grew organically. Jennifer created a small informal school on weekends where children in need received tutoring. Margaret contributed by teaching basic cooking to the mothers. Walter taught small household repairs to the fathers. "You know what's funny?" Jennifer commented to Margaret after a year of work. "I've never been as happy as I am now. And look, I have nothing." "Daughter, you have everything. You just didn't know how to see it." Robert, meanwhile, underwent a slower and more resistant transformation. Pride still spoke loudly, but the daily exposure to stories of overcoming and observing how his parents used their wealth constructively planted seeds of change. The decisive moment for Robert came when Peter, his own son, asked an innocent question during a Sunday lunch. "Dad, why did you kick Grandpa and Grandma out of the house?" "Who told you that?" "No one told me. I heard you talking to Mom. You said they were a burden and that now they had money to take care of themselves." Robert looked at his 8-year-old son, saw the innocent confusion in the child's eyes, and felt something break inside him. Peter was learning that abandoning elderly family members was normal behavior. That night, Robert sought out his parents for the first time in 2 years, not out of obligation, but out of a need to talk. "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you." They were on the porch, Margaret knitting, Walter Thompson reading the newspaper. The scene was peaceful, domestic, everything Robert had rejected years before, considering it old people's life. "Speak, son." I look at you here and see that you're happier now than you were before." "How is that possible?" Margaret put down her knitting. "Robert, do you want a quick answer, or do you really want to understand?" "I want to understand." "Then sit here, and I'll tell you something." Margaret told him about the nights in the shelter when she cried from missing her children, about how Walter hid the pain in his chest so as not to worry her, about how they discovered that other people can be family when your own blood children are not. "Robert, do you know what was the happiest day of my life since you threw us out?" "Which one?" "It was when Mrs. Ethel called me her daughter for the first time, because I understood that being a mother isn't just about giving birth, it's about caring. And she cared for me when my own children did not." Robert was silent for long minutes, processing his mother's words. "Mom, can I try to fix this?" "You can. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick." The change in Robert was neither dramatic nor immediate. It was slow, built through small daily gestures. He started arriving earlier for work, stayed beyond his hours when necessary. He stopped complaining about tasks and began suggesting improvements. "Dad, what if we created a community garden?" he suggested one afternoon. "The seniors who are able to work can take care of it, and we donate part of the produce to needy families." "Good idea," agreed Walter. "Do you want to coordinate it?" "Me? Dad, I don't know anything about farming. I didn't know anything about caring for the elderly either. We learn by doing." The garden became a success. Robert discovered he had a knack for organization and planning, skills he had misused in the past, but that now served a useful purpose. Seeing the seniors getting excited about working the land, observing how the project generated extra income for the home, all this awakened in him a sense of purpose he had never known. "Has Robert really changed, or is he just acting?" Margaret asked Michael during a private conversation. "Mum, yesterday I saw him talking with Mrs. Ethel about the problems she's having with her grandson. He gave fatherly advice, not like someone pretending to care. I think the change is real." The confirmation came on a rainy afternoon that brought back painful memories. Margaret was in the kitchen when she heard a loud argument in the garden. She ran to see what was happening and found Robert arguing with a well-dressed man. "What's going on here?" she asked. "This guy showed up here saying he's a real estate agent," explained Robert. "He's trying to convince Mrs. Ethel to sell the land where her daughter lives, promising easy money." "So what? Mom, the land is worth 3 times what he's offering. And from the conversation I overheard, he wants to cheat a 70-year-old lady who can barely read." Margaret saw in her son's eyes a genuine, uncalculated indignation. Robert was truly protecting Mrs. Ethel without gaining anything from it. "Sir, what are you doing here?" Margaret addressed the real estate agent. "Ma'am, this is a private conversation with Mrs. Ethel." Mrs. Ethel lives on my property. Any business conversation here goes through me first. The agent left without closing the deal. Robert walked Margaret back to the house in silence. Mom, I just couldn't let her be tricked. It reminded me of you that day on the road. Robert, no, Mom, let me speak. I know I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know that I understand. I understand what kind of son I was and what kind of man I became, Anne. And I don't like what I see at all. It was the first sincere apology Robert had made since the beginning of it all. Margaret hugged him right there, in the middle of the rain that began to fall, remembering another rain, another hug, when everything had fallen apart. The third year at the Thompson Care Home brought stability and growth to the project. The property now housed 40 elderly residents, had a waiting list, and had become a model for other similar initiatives in Illinois. Margaret, now 70 years old, discovered she was a natural-born manager. She coordinated teams, negotiated supply contracts, gave lectures across the entire state. Walter, at 72, supervised 3 vocational workshops and a small furniture factory that employed 15 people from the region. Margaret, can you believe we became business owners in our golden years? Walter joked one night. I believe we were always business owners, only before we managed a family. Now we manage a community. Michael graduated in nursing through a scholarship program that Margaret created for the home's employees. His volunteer work turned into a formal job, and he specialized in geriatric care. Dad, there's something I want to tell you, he said at a monthly family meeting they had instituted. Speak, son. I want to say thank you for not giving up on us, for giving me a chance to show who I really am. Michael, you were always a good person, said Walter. You were just lost. Jennifer got approval to open a formal school on the home's grounds. The educational project had grown so much it needed a proper structure. She studied pedagogy through distance learning courses, discovering a vocation for teaching she never knew she had. Mom, do you believe in destiny? She asked one afternoon while they prepared teaching materials. I believe in consequences, dear. We reap what we sow. So you think all this was meant to happen? I think we had to go through the storm to learn to appreciate the sun. The most emotional moment for Margaret came when she received a visit from a delegation of social workers from other cities. They wanted to learn how to replicate the Thompson House model. Mrs. Margaret, what is the secret to the project's success? One of the visitors asked. Not treating the elderly as disposable, it's that simple. But how do you maintain quality with so many residents? Look, dear, when you put love into what you do, quality is a natural consequence. The fame of the Thompson Care Home reached the ears of state authorities. Margaret was invited to join a council that created public policies for the elderly. Walter received an honor from the city council for services rendered to the community. You've become public figures, Robert joked during a dinner. We've become examples that you don't need to die to leave a legacy, Margaret replied. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. The fourth year brought unexpected challenges. The demand for spots at the house grew so much that Margaret and Walter decided to expand the project. They bought neighboring properties and planned a second care home. But the expansion revealed a problem. Robert, now fully rehabilitated within the family, wanted to take over the financial management of the project. Dad, I have business experience. I can help make the money go further. Robert, your business went bankrupt? And you stole from us, Margaret reminded him, always direct. Mum, that was 4 years ago. I've changed. Really changed. Or just learned to hide it better. Tension returned to the Thompson family. Robert felt ready for greater responsibilities, but Margaret and Walter weren't sure they could fully trust him. The solution came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Ethel. Margaret, may I offer a suggestion from someone who's lived 82 years on this earth? Of course, Mrs. Ethel. Put that boy to the test. Give him a small project to manage. If it works out, you'll know you can trust him. If it fails, the damage will be small. The test project was a small bakery at the care home. Robert was put in charge of setting up and running the business, which would sell bread and pastries made by the residents themselves to the local community. If you can make this bakery turn a profit for 6 straight months, we'll talk about bigger responsibilities, Mum, said Margaret. Robert took the challenge seriously. He researched suppliers, negotiated prices, created a menu with recipes that Margaret and other residents knew well. Grandparents' Bakery opened on a Saturday morning with a line out the door. "Mrs. Margaret, this cheese bread of yours is the best I've ever had," said a regular customer. "The secret is to make it with love, dear," Margaret replied, beaming. The bakery was an immediate success. Robert organized deliveries to local grocery stores, set up a system for party orders, and established partnerships with nearby schools. Within 3 months, the business was making enough profit to pay the wages of the residents who worked there. "Son, you've done a great job," said Walter one evening, watching Robert review the day's accounts. "Dad, for the first time in my life, I'm building something real, not just thinking about making money." "And how does that feel?" "Good. It feels good." The change in Robert was solidified when he turned down a partnership offer at a construction materials company in Chicago. The salary would have been 3 times higher than anything he could earn at the care home. "Why aren't you going?" asked Fiona, his wife, who still dreamed of the luxuries of the past. "Because I like what I do here. I like seeing Mrs. Ethel happy selling her cookies. I like seeing Peter learning woodworking with his grandfather. I like having a real family for the first time in my life." The answer displeased Fiona, who began pressuring Robert to accept job offers in other cities. Their arguments intensified, creating a tense atmosphere at home. "Robert, you need to decide what you want from life," Margaret said in a frank conversation. "Your wife isn't happy here, and that's going to hurt everyone." "Mum, I don't want to leave." "Then you'll have to choose between your new family and your old family." The choice was painful, but Robert made a decision that surprised everyone. He filed for divorce from Fiona, but negotiated for her to maintain regular contact with the children. "Peter and Sophie will spend weekends with their mother, but they'll live here with me," he explained to his parents. "I want them to grow up learning the values you're teaching." "Son, are you sure?" "Mum, for the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure about something." Robert's decision to prioritize his children's education over material gains marked his final reconciliation with his parents. Margaret and Walter Thompson began including him in important household decisions, and he demonstrated responsibility and maturity he hadn't shown before. The 5th year of Thompson Care Home brought national recognition. A documentary about the project aired on television, showing how an abandoned elderly couple transformed pain into life purpose. "Margaret, did you see? We're on television," shouted Mrs. Ethel from the living room. The reporter interviewed Margaret in the home's garden, surrounded by residents who had become family. "Mrs. Margaret, did you expect your story would reach this scale?" "Dear, when you're standing in the rain on the road with nowhere to go, you don't think about scale. You just think about surviving the next day. And what would you say to other families going through similar situations? That pain has an expiration date, but love doesn't. And that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what truly matters." The interview moved viewers across the country. The home began receiving spontaneous donations, support letters, and visits from people wanting to see the project firsthand. "Look at this," said Walter, reading a letter sent by a lady from New York. "She says our story gave her courage to sue her son, who stole her retirement money." "Walter, we've become an inspiration," observed Margaret, amazed. "Who would have thought?" Jennifer married again, this time to a local public school teacher she met during the home's educational activities. The ceremony was simple, held in the property's garden with all residents present. "Mum, thank you so much for never giving up on me," she said during her dance with Margaret. "Sweetheart, a mother never gives up. She just sometimes needs to wait for her child to grow up." Michael became a registered nurse and decided to specialize in gerontology. His work at the home had awakened a passion for caring for the elderly that he turned into a professional career. "Dad, I want to set up a physical therapy clinic here at the home," he proposed during a family meeting. "Michael, that will be expensive," considered Walter. "It doesn't need to be fancy, just functional. There are many elderly people in the region who need care and can't afford to go to the city." The physical therapy clinic opened the following year, serving not only home residents, but the entire regional community. Michael hired 2 partner physical therapists and created a free care program for needy families. "Son, you've turned pain into profession," observed Margaret, watching Michael work tenderly with a lady who had suffered a fall. "I learned from you, Mom. I learned that suffering can be fuel to help other people." The following years solidified Thompson House as a respected and necessary institution. Margaret developed arthritis in her hands, but continued coordinating activities, adapting to physical limitations without losing enthusiasm. Walter needed knee surgery, but returned to work as soon as he could. "We're getting really old now," he joked one morning, watching Margaret take her blood pressure medication. "Walter, we were already old when all this began. The difference is now we're useful old people." Margaret's 80th birthday was celebrated with a party that gathered over 200 people. Former home residents who had found families or independent housing returned to honor her. Municipal and state authorities attended. But the most moving moment was when Peter, now 13, gave an impromptu speech. "Grandma Margaret, when I was little, I didn't understand why you lived here with so many old people. Now I understand. You don't live with them, they live with you. And I'm proud to be the grandson of the grandma who taught everyone that family isn't just about blood. It's a choice." Margaret cried with emotion. At 80 years old, hearing these words from the grandson she almost lost because of her children's ambitions was like receiving the greatest birthday gift possible. Walter, at 82, developed diabetes and had to slow down his work pace. But he refused to stop completely. "Margaret, we built this place. We built this. I'm not just going to stand by and watch other people run it. Nobody's telling you to stop, honey, just to accept help." The help came mainly from Robert, who took over the full operational management of the house. 5 years of constant work had transformed the man who abandoned his parents into a trustworthy person who put the community's interests above his own. "Dad, I have a proposal," he said in a private conversation with Walter. "Go ahead. How about we open a second home specialized in elderly people with Alzheimer's and dementia? There's a huge demand in the region." "That will be complicated, son. Specialized care is expensive." "I know, but I also know we can afford it. And I'm certain it's what Uncle Albert would have wanted done with his money." The second home was inaugurated 2 years later, attached to the first one, but with a structure specifically designed for special care. Michael coordinated the medical project, Jennifer adapted the educational activities for cognitive stimulation, Robert managed the construction and equipment. "Look what you've all become," said Dr. Arthur, now 79 years old and still a volunteer lawyer for the project. "A family that takes care of families." During the inauguration of the second home, a reporter asked a question that caught Margaret by surprise. "Mrs. Margaret, do you forgive your children for what they did?" Margaret thought for long seconds before answering. "Young man, forgiveness isn't something you give once and that's it. Forgiveness is something you build every day, brick by brick. My children have been building my forgiveness for 5 years, and they're doing a good job. And have they earned this forgiveness? Robert and Michael have earned it. Jennifer is almost there. But do you know what's more important than my forgiveness? What? They've forgiven themselves. Because when we don't forgive ourselves, we can't be at peace with anyone." The 6th year brought the first major loss for the extended family of Thompson House. Mrs. Ethel, at 87 years old, passed away in her sleep, peaceful in her bed. It was the first time the project faced a collective mourning. "How will we manage to go on without her?" asked Sophie, now 12 years old, and very attached to the lady who had taught her crochet. "Sophie, Mrs. Ethel didn't leave," explained Margaret, hugging her granddaughter. "She just changed addresses, but everything she taught us remains here." Mrs. Ethel's funeral brought together the entire town. The church couldn't hold everyone who wanted to say goodbye to the lady who had become a symbol of dignity in old age. Margaret gave a speech at the cemetery, her voice firm despite the tears. "Ethel arrived here thinking her life was over. She left here proving that life only ends when we give up on living. She didn't give up, and neither will we." The loss of Mrs. Ethel brought the Thompson family even closer together. Robert cried openly at the wake, holding his father's hand. "Dad, I almost didn't get to know her because of my stubbornness." "Son, What matters is that you did get to know her, and that you learned from her. The later years were about consolidating and perpetuating the legacy. Margaret and Walter created a foundation to ensure the project would continue functioning even after their passing. The three children were named directors, each responsible for a specific area. "Are you sure you trust us?" asked Robert during the signing of the foundation documents. "Robert, trust isn't something you give. It's something you earn." "And you won," replied Walter. On the eve of Margaret's 85th birthday, she and Walter walked alone through the property that now housed over 60 seniors in 2 homes, employed 30 people from the area, and was studied by universities as a model of social care. "Margaret, do you remember that night under the awning? How could I forget? Were you scared?" Margaret stopped walking and looked at her husband of nearly half a century. "Walter, that night I thought our life was over, that we would die abandoned, forgotten, without leaving anything behind in this world. And now? Now I know we left everything. Not just these houses, not just this project. We left the example that it's possible to turn anything bad into something good." Walter kissed her right there, in the middle of the garden as he had done 50 years ago. Some residents passing by smiled, whispering among themselves about the couple of sweethearts who ran the home. "And the kids?" asked Margaret, referring to their children as she always did. "The kids learned, my love. They learned that family is commitment, not convenience." Margaret's 85th birthday party was the event of the year in Greenfield. Officials, former residents, families from the community all came to celebrate the woman who had turned abandonment into welcome. Robert gave a speech that moved the audience. "Mom, 10 years ago I threw you and Dad out of my house because I thought you were a burden on my life. Today I know you are the foundation of my life. I know I can't take back what I did, but I can promise that I will spend the rest of my days proving that I learned the lesson." Michael presented a film with testimonials from all the people who had passed through the home over the years. Jennifer organized a performance by the school children singing songs that Margaret had taught them. "Mom, look around," said Jennifer. "Look how many lives you've touched, how many families were rebuilt, how many seniors regained their dignity, how many children learned the right values." Margaret looked around and saw smiling faces, people hugging, 3 generations living together in harmony. She saw her Joseph teaching dominoes to Peter, Mrs. Carroll telling stories to Sophie, Michael caring for seniors with physical limitations. "Jennifer, do you know what makes me proudest?" "What, Mom?" "That you 3 became better people because of what we went through. If we hadn't suffered, maybe you never would have learned to be truly good people." At the end of the party, when everyone had left and the family was gathered on the porch, Walter made an observation that summed up the entire journey. "Margaret, do you remember what I said that first day in the rain? That we were going to be okay?" "I remember. I was lying then. I had no idea how we were going to survive." "I know. But you were right anyway." "How so?" "Walter, we didn't just end up okay. We ended up better than we ever were." The last rays of sunlight that day lit up Margaret's face, highlighting wrinkles that told stories of suffering transformed into wisdom. Walter held her hand, the 2 wedding rings that had withstood everything still shining on their wrinkled fingers. "And now," he asked, "now we carry on, because as long as there are abandoned seniors in this country, our mission isn't over." On the opposite side of the porch, Robert watched his parents in silence. 10 years earlier, he had considered those 2 old people obstacles to his prosperity. Now he saw in them the most prosperous people he knew, not in money, but in purpose. "Dad," called Peter, interrupting his contemplation. "Are you coming to play soccer with us?" "Yes, son." As he ran after the ball on the lawn of the house, Robert looked back one last time. His parents remained on the porch, holding hands, watching the activity with serene smiles. They had lost a house, but gained a home. They had lost ungrateful children, but gained a hand-picked family. The rain that had once marked the worst moment of their lives now watered gardens where dozens of people found new hope. And on that late afternoon, with the sound of children playing and elderly people chatting, Margaret Thompson knew that the 8-year-old girl, who once dreamed of being important when she grew up, had finally managed to fulfill her dream. End of story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of this story of overcoming? Have you ever been through a similar situation in your family? Tell us in the comments if you believe that Margaret and Walter made the right choices with their children. Your like and subscription to the channel mean a lot to us to continue bringing inspiring stories like this one.